Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and tackle what we call the prehistoric family myth. Because, whenever we try to picture our earliest ancestors, it is so easy to imagine these tiny, completely isolated bands of people, just kind of trapped in the exact same cave, with the exact same relatives, for thousands of years. It's a super popular myth, but as we're going to see, ancient DNA tells a remarkably different story.
Look, it's an unavoidable question, isn't it? If you imagine a prehistoric group of, say, just 20 people hunting and gathering together, logic kind of suggests that eventually everyone becomes someone's sibling or cousin or, a strangely familiar-looking grandfather. With nobody else around, you just naturally assume ancient humans frequently reproduced with close family members. But the reality is actually far more fascinating, and it completely rewrites how we understand early human intelligence and social structure. So to actually answer this question, researchers turned to ancient DNA. They looked at the genomes of 1,785 ancient individuals from all sorts of regions and time periods. And the results? Absolutely stunning. Out of that massive sample size, they were looking for individuals who carried the genetic pattern you'd expect from parents who are first-degree relatives, meaning like a brother and sister or a parent and child. Out of nearly 2,000 ancient people, they found just one. Literally one. That single data point brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly rare close inbreeding actually was. Out of everyone sampled, less than 3% showed genetic signs of even close cousin reproduction. And substantially fewer than 10% were unions between first cousins. So the big takeaway here? Sure, ancient humans sometimes reproduced with family members, but they worked surprisingly hard to avoid it. The real mystery is, how did they actually pull that off without family trees or birth certificates or genetic testing? Well, the crucial point is disentangling two very distinct concepts. We really have to correct our mental image of what an ancient community actually was. Yes, a physical camp was small, but its social world was massive. A hunter-gatherer band might only have a few dozen daily companions, but it was absolutely not this sealed biological container. Instead, think of it as a flexible, shifting node within a much larger social network containing hundreds of connected allies. These ancient humans didn't need a dating app to avoid inbreeding, right? They just needed visitors, and the archaeological record proves they absolutely had them. We find stone tools made from raw materials that are located insanely far from their geological sources. Shells traveled way inland. Pigments, ornaments, survival tech, it all passed through dozens of hands across vast distances. And with those materials came stories, knowledge, obligations, and, crucially, romantic opportunities. Just a single generation of movement between camps introduced enough genetic diversity to keep the whole community healthy. And actually, scratch that, this wasn't just a Homo sapiens survival trick. We have remarkable evidence from Chigaryskaya Cave in southern Siberia, where researchers recovered DNA from a group of Neanderthals who lived roughly 54,000 years ago. Now, this was a tiny camp of maybe 20 individuals. If anyone was destined for unavoidable family reproduction, it would for sure be this incredibly isolated group living right at the edge of the known world. But this dynamic reveals an incredible biological safeguard. When geneticists analyzed the specific Neanderthal group, they found that the Y chromosomes, which are inherited down the paternal line, had very low diversity. So the men largely stayed put, but the mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited through mothers, had much greater diversity. What does this mean? It proves that women frequently moved into this community from other Neanderthal groups. Even out in the extreme, freezing Siberian cold, they were successfully expanding their mating pool. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do geneticists map out these ancient family trees in the first place? To understand that, we have to talk about something called runs of homozygosity. It's a bit technical, but essentially it's how dead people reveal relationships they never wrote down. It happens when an individual inherits matching sections of identical DNA purely because both of their parents shared a recent common ancestor. Let's break that down with a quick analogy. If you imagine human DNA as an enormous, epic book, distant relatives share scattered, matching sentences from ancestors really far back in time. But if siblings reproduce, their child receives entire matching chapters, because the parents inherited massive overlapping pieces from the exact same recent parents. And that dangerously increases the chance of harmful recessive variants meeting up, which can lead to severe health and fertility issues. Ancient people could absolutely observe those negative outcomes, even if they had no idea what a chromosome was. But humanity had an even more immediate defense mechanism. Nature essentially installed an extremely aggressive psychological sibling vibe to instinctually suppress attraction. It's known as the Westermarck effect. Basically, the brain uses childhood familiarity as a rough biological clue. So the person who stole your food every morning throughout early childhood is instantly categorized by your brain as a sibling, dramatically reducing any later sexual attraction. And early human culture took that raw biological instinct and heavily reinforced it. Early societies were, frankly, obsessed with kinship. Ancient languages developed intricate words distinguishing a mother from an aunt or separating parallel cousins from cross cousins. Through these incredibly strict rules, marriage became way more than just a biological imperative. It became vital social infrastructure. Systematically exchanging partners between lineages carried genes, sure, but more importantly, it carried trust, trade, and survival insurance in a deeply dangerous world.
As societies evolved, so did those rules. Now, you might logically assume the invention of agriculture made finding unrelated partners vastly easier, right? Because populations grew and settled down. But interestingly, the hoarding of land, livestock, and stored grain actually created entirely new strategic reasons to control marriage. Suddenly, some farming communities started keeping wealth and property tightly within specific lineages, which sometimes led to far more localized marriage networks compared to the fluid free movement of the hunter-gatherers. So we know the biological instincts, and we know the cultural rules that the vast majority of humanity followed. But just when we think we understand the whole shebang, we have to ask a darker question. What happens when immense power completely overrides biology?
Well, across time and geography, we find some shocking rule breakers among the elites. 5,000 years ago, deep inside the highly prestigious Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland, researchers found an adult man whose parents were first-degree relatives. Or, in antiquity, the royals of Ptolemaic Egypt embraced sibling marriage so enthusiastically that Cleopatra's family tree famously ended up looking more like a recycling symbol.
But we really have to be careful how we view these anomalies. For instance, in a Bronze Age cave in Italy called Grotta della Monica, geneticists found a boy with extreme matching DNA segments revealing he was born from a father-daughter union. In cases like this, we must remain strictly objective. The DNA simply provides the biology. It literally cannot tell us the social context, the degree of coercion, or the trauma involved. As the quote notes, it records reproduction, not consent. We have to resist the urge to invent romantic explanations for intense, abusive power imbalances. But why did rulers do this when literally everyone else avoided it? Because for these extreme elites, breaking the universal incest taboo was the ultimate flex of political power. By engaging in sibling or close kin marriage, rulers were proving to the public that they were so fundamentally sacred and divine that ordinary human rules simply didn't apply to them. They were willing to risk massive genetic health costs just to keep their royal rank fiercely exclusive and legally untouchable.
So wrapping up this explainer, those royal exceptions are memorable precisely because they were so incredibly rare. The vast majority of early humans successfully utilized these overlapping, nested defenses to survive and thrive. They used a built-in psychological aversion to childhood peers, they invented complex cultural taboos, and most brilliantly of all, they used fluid movement and seasonal gatherings to constantly introduce fresh genes and build new alliances.
Ultimately, what you should take away from all this is a totally new image of our prehistoric ancestors. They absolutely weren't trapped in isolated caves, staring blankly at their cousins. Their relentless, intelligent drive to connect with strangers, to trade, to travel, and to marry outside their groups kept humanity's family tree from becoming a stagnant circle. They built a massive, ancient networking infrastructure to survive. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. How much of that ancient, instinctual drive to connect with unfamiliar faces still shapes how we build our global networks today?